Good afternoon, everyone. I see people are still filtering in. I'm Dr. Mary Omer. I'm with the School of Social Work. I'm a professor there and the chair of the Community Organization and Social Action Specialization. It's great that you joined us today. So we are going to talk about Community Organizing 101. You're learning about key strategies for community organization and civic engagement from our project, the Research for Equity and Power project in Homewood. I'm going to introduce the rest of my team. We have Donnell Pearl. Do you want to say hi, Donnell?
Hi, my name is Donnell Pearl. I'm a member of the REP Project, a community researcher, and I'm a resident of Homewood.
Dr. G?
Hello. Hi, my name is Shanna Tharp Gilliam, and I am the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Homewood Children's Village. And you'll hear more about our partnership throughout the talk.
And Katie?
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Holler. I'm a Master's of Social Work student specializing in community organization and social action, and I'm completing my Master's field placement with the Research for Equity and Power.
And Evie?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Evie. I am an MSW COSA student, and I'm also a research assistant for the REP project. Thanks for coming today.
Great. And Nikisha?
Hello, everyone. I'm Nikisha. I'm one of the community board members, and I am a longtime resident of Homewood Rushing.
Kelly Probst is also going to be helping with us today. She's an MSW student working with Dr. G at Homewood Children's Village. So we want to know who's here today. There's about 32 of us. Why don't you put in the chat, if you're a student, what your major is, and if you're an undergrad or grad student, pit faculty and staff, maybe what department you work in and what area. And if you're a community member, the organization or neighborhood you're from. So we can at least see who's here and who's joining us. So today we are going to talk about our project, the Research for Equity and Power project, as a case study for community organizing. You're going to learn about some basic strategies that residents in our program also learned and are using to advance equitable development in Homewood. And we're going to practice using those strategies in some breakout groups on some key relevant issues today that are really important in today's society. And I'm going to pass it to Katie, who's going to talk about Zoom etiquette.
Hey everyone, so I'm sure at this point we've all done plenty of Zoom meetings, but just to lay some groundwork for how we would like this conversation to go, here's a couple tips we'd like you to keep in mind. First off, during the presentation part of this conversation, we ask that you keep yourself muted and your video off just to make sure the connection is good throughout. But then during discussion times and the breakout rooms, you can go ahead and turn your video back on. And when you're speaking, turn your volume on as well. Secondly, we'd encourage you to utilize the chat function to ask questions throughout the presentation. If something comes to mind, feel free to put it in the chat. Donnell is going to be monitoring that chat, so he'll be able to respond to you directly or bring it up at some point during the presentation. And then finally, feel free to use the reactions, the clapping hands or the thumbs up throughout the presentation. Since we're not going to be able to see your facial reactions, go ahead and just let us know if something speaks to you, if we mentioned something you haven't thought of before that really you want to use, go ahead and give us a little reaction.
Wow. There's some great diversity of people here from different majors: community and government relations, psychology, medicine, history, poli-sci, nursing, social work. Wow, marketing. I love it. I'm so excited. So we put in the chat the PDF of our slides, so you're welcome to download those and keep those, follow along. So I'm going to pass the popcorn to Dr. G.
Hello, everyone. So I have been charged with giving you an overview of the Research for Equity and Power project. So basically, this is a community-based participatory research project in the truest sense of the term. From the very beginning, Homewood Children's Village and the University of Pittsburgh have come together to develop the aims, develop the research questions, identify CAB members, and work together equitably on this project. The goal is to increase civic engagement on equitable development in Homewood. There are a lot of changes happening in Homewood. There are lots of changes happening not only in our neighborhood, but also in our city, in our county, and in our country. So the idea was to strengthen residents' ability to influence neighborhood change by helping to equip youth and adults with information on how to leverage their influence and power, and also create a strategy that can be replicated not only in Homewood, but in also other communities around our region and hopefully even the country. So this project is comprised of a few different components. I mentioned the Community Advisory Board. That's a group of residents from Homewood who were recruited specifically to help inform the project, to give us feedback at each critical step. We also have community conversations. That's the crux of the work. Over about 8 weeks, we gathered together to talk about key concepts and to do activities that ultimately resulted in the Equitable Development Playbook, which is going to be shared with you in the link. The next step on our journey is the Citizen Training Academy, which is where we will disseminate this information and hopefully get a lot more residents on board with this information and how to use it. So I'm going to be passing on to Nikisha, who is a CAB member, but just let me give you a few steps on what it is that we did as a community advisory board. The first step was to help to develop the program goals and activities, to refine the research methods, and then they also came up with the branding, that cute little picture you see in the top corner. That was something that our CAB members came up with. They also gave us feedback on program activities. Sometimes what we came up with was okay. Other times we needed a little help. So we were glad to have the CAB members to help us along. And then finally, we feel like it's critical for us to be telling our own story. As people of color and resident in communities, we need to be the ones who actually have power and control over our own narrative. So just to give you a little overview of what we did during those 8 weeks. These are actually the topics that we covered in our conversations. You can see here they ranged from civic engagement to equitable development, covered topics like gentrification and revitalization, and also had an opportunity to speak directly with policymakers, planners, and developers. And then we also played a game about equitable development, which gave us an opportunity to practice the skills and develop mock campaigns to address some of these issues. Over that time, we also went through some of the existing plans, like Homewood's comprehensive plan, the equitable development strategy from the city of Pittsburgh, and looked at some actual examples of real estate development strategies that have been employed in our region. So this is the cover of the Equitable Development Playbook, which was co-created with the team that you see here, and also these lovely individuals that you see on the cover of the book. And we just wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to our CAB members, and you can see their names here on the slide. And Nikisha is actually going to pick up from here and tell us a bit about her experience on the project. Nikisha?
Thank you so much, Dr. G. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I apologize for my video not working, but I'm having some technical difficulties. It was a very positive and beneficial experience serving as a CAB member. We met a lot of people. We met people from the community. As Dr. G stated, we met people in real estate development. We met other community partners. One of my favorite aspects of it was the speakers and having access to those speakers. We met a gentleman named Derek Tillman, and he's actually the CEO of Bridging the Gap Development in the Hill District. And he shared with us how he was a resident of urban housing and development as a child and knew some of the things that were missing. And in these developments that he does on the Hill District, he makes sure that some of those aspects are built into what he does. So he makes sure that there's resources for individuals to get counseling, or if they need assistance getting jobs. And so it's not just housing, it's also a collaborative effort to make sure that these residents who need it can be successful throughout life. We also met a woman, Demi Kalki, and she's actually an alumni of University of Pittsburgh, and she works with Neighborhood Allies. She was another dynamic speaker. And so you make all these relationships with people that can be really beneficial, even outside of the equitable development playbook that we came up with and the REP project. So it was really beneficial to me, and those relationships have continued on.
All right, so let's talk about what civic engagement is. Playing an active role to improve condition in your own community. If you actually look at the picture, this is a game we played with our participants in the REP project called the Yarn Game. It's a game where we asked them to talk about things that they engaged in their community that could be considered civic engagement. Could be anything from, you know, helping a neighbor, to cleaning something up, to making a phone call to your city councilman. There's so many ways to engage in civic activity that improve the quality of life that you can see in your community and shape its future. So a person who is civically engaged can be politically engaged. They can act in community service, social change, volunteerism, participation, lots of different ways. Me personally, I prefer to clean my street up. So let's talk about the path that got me to working on the REP project. I started out working in a program called TLI, the Leadership Institute. It was a program that HCV brought to the Homewood area. Basically, it gave us an overview of the history of Homewood, its historical importance to Pittsburgh, and lots of different things that gave us the background to communicate with people who are city planners, developers, and to actually understand the language that a lot of these people were speaking. So through that program, I actually made some connections in different organizations, and I saw that there was an opportunity to work as a community researcher with the REP project through Pitt and the partnership that they had with HCV. So that's how I got started, but can you give me an example of how you've been civically engaged in your community in the chat? And while you're doing that, I am going to introduce 2 articles about REP in the chat box, and then ask Nikisha to share a story about her civic engagement through the REP project.
Okay, Nikisha, why don't you share your experience with REP being interviewed for the articles that Donnell's putting in the chat box?
Certainly, Dr. Omer. I had the opportunity to actually be interviewed by University of Pittsburgh and also the Post-Gazette as a result of the article with University of Pittsburgh. And so when I did that article, the writer from the Post-Gazette, she called me, her name is Diana Nelson-Jones, and she called me and we were talking, and she asked me other things about the community, and I just told her about a story. A good friend of mine, her mother had her door busted in, very similar to a Breonna Taylor kind of scenario. She's 80 plus years old. It was a no-knock warrant, and the city wouldn't pay for her door, even though they were at the wrong house. And so I shared this story with the writer at the Post-Gazette, and as a result, she wrote an article about that story in the Post-Gazette. And so not only did she publish an article about our project and me being a CAB member, but she also published an article about what happened to my friend's mother. And as a result of that article that she wrote about my friend's mother, it put pressure on the city for them to resolve the issue. And it also brought, you know, anonymous donors who said, hey, we'll pay for the door. You know, this shouldn't have happened. This is a woman who's 80 years old. The door was like $3,000. And she went and bought another one, of course, because she wants to feel safe with her credit card. And they wouldn't pay for the interest charges. So it just brought awareness to an issue that, you know, number one, our residents in Pittsburgh wouldn't typically know about. And then also help to at least potentially get some resolve for her. So I think that, you know, when you talk about civic engagement and you participate in these great organizations, it's more than just that actual project. You know, you meet so many people and you come up with these different community relationships that they really can serve you in many different ways, whether it's getting employment, getting intellectual resources, having access to people like writers and professors and people who can kind of further you along on your journey for civic engagement. So I thought that was pretty cool, that a situation that we were really, really upset about in my immediate circle, she got the ball rolling. And all of that manifested as a result of me being a CAB member.
Thank you, Nikisha. That's a powerful story, and one that's really very important for everyone on this call. And you never know what's going to happen when you get civically engaged. So it's really kind of cool. And I've been looking in the chat. So Katie's up next, but I've been looking in the chat and seeing all the ways that people are engaged. President-elect of the Junior League, volunteers to pack food, calling representatives, you know, looking at volunteering at a children's hospital as an entrance screener for COVID-19. All of these things are super powerful. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to pass it to Katie.
Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, great. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of community organizing. Community organizing is all about getting people to work together within their community to create some sort of social change to benefit their quality of life. It has a rich history in different social movements, such as the labor movement. And yeah, it's all about advancing community change and social justice. It develops collective or mutual interests by working with others and taking action on issues the community cares about. So it's all about the community deciding what they want changed in their community and figuring out how to make that change happen.
So I'm going to say, Katie, that's a picture from our playbook on the right there. So all of the strategies we're talking about that Katie's going to describe to you are in the playbook that is in the chat box. So thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Dr. Omer. All right, and the next slide. Yes, so these are the three of the main strategies that Dr. Omer was just talking about, and you can find more details about them in the playbook. So these are the engagement strategies we're going to focus on. The first one is find common interests. The second one is use existing plans. And the third is develop strategies to influence partners and potential opponents. So throughout the rest of this example, I'm going to use the example of redlining. And if you haven't learned about redlining before, redlining is an old banking practice, racist banking practice that was used to keep Black people and people in Black communities from receiving loans to purchase homes. So bankers would literally take a map and mark the red communities with a red line. So then people would know not to give loans to people in Black communities. They called them risky, and it had long-lasting effects. So that's the example I'm going to use for the rest of these strategies. Okay. So the first key strategy is finding common interests, and this is what we call self-interests. And sometimes when we hear self-interest, we might think of selfish, you know, what do I want? But really, it's just determining what's best for the community, what's going to help them. So that's step one, is what matters to you. Step two is know what matters to others. So what matters to someone else. And then three is finding the intersection of the self-interest between you and the other person. And by finding that intersection, you'll be able to benefit both people in that conversation. So for residents of previously redlined communities, the self-interest might be affordable housing. Self-interest of others, if it's a developer, might be to make money. And somewhere between affordable housing and making money, there is an intersection. So that's what we would be looking for. The second key strategy is use existing plans. So this is all about working smarter, not harder. In a lot of communities, there's already plans in place that talk about resident goals for affordable housing, parks, business developments. You just have to look for them. So you want to first read and use policies, plans, laws, regulations that are already in place to find the sections that refer to your interest. And then you want to use the report as evidence to support your interest to influential stakeholders and understand the person or organization that you're trying to influence. So you want to make sure you understand where you're coming from and where the other person is coming from as well. So along with that, you'll want to be able to understand who your potential partners are. So the people who have the same self-interests as you and your community. Usually these are people who respond to your request for information, agree to work with you, and share information. So there's a strong partnership there. However, there will also be potential opponents, so people and companies and organizations who have different self-interests than you. And usually their actions will look like not responding to your request for information, not really interested in working with you, and they don't share information. So your potential partners could be other community members, local businesses, lawmakers, community organizations. Potential opponents might be developers, people who profit from developments, and people who do not understand or relate to issues caused by policies from redlining. And then the third key strategy is develop strategies to influence potential partners and opponents. So you want to decide who you want to engage with and how you're going to do that for both partners and opponents. So you want to identify and select a potential partner or opponent that you want to influence, engage others in your community who care about the issue that you care about, decide exactly who and what you want to influence, be as specific as possible. This will help you create specific steps and goals. And then finally, work together to develop and implement strategies to influence the potential partner or opponent. So ways that you might do this is by creating flyers to distribute in your community, putting up a social media post, hosting an online Zoom meeting, that kind of thing. And then finally, organizing and act. So organizing is coming together as a group and formulating a plan. So who else in your community cares about the issue? What is the best approach to influence your potential partner and opponent? What strategies and tactics will you use? And how will you engage others to influence the issue? So once you have your plan in place, you want to act on it. What specific action steps will you take? How will you get the word out about your efforts? And how will you follow up to find out if your influence worked? So that's a brief rundown of Community Organizing 101. So now we're going to think back to all those amazing answers y'all just gave about how you've been civically engaged in the past. And so now that you have an understanding about community organizing, how could you use community organizing strategies to increase civic engagement in your PIT role or community role? So go ahead and put your answers into the chat. Again, how could you use community organizing strategies to increase civic engagement or to improve the efforts of civic engagement in your PIT or community role? So I'm going to give y'all a couple minutes or a few seconds to answer that.
And as she does that, we're going to tell you about what we're going to do next. So we are going to do some breakout sessions where we're going to randomly assign you to some groups to apply some of those community organizing and civic engagement principles that you just heard from Katie about. So these are really issues that are current. So one, voter rights. We're hearing about all kinds of issues with voter rights, information, having correct information on where to vote, and how important that is to people to empower them, right, in civic engagement, to help them be more civically engaged, and how important that is for democracy. The other issue that has been clearly an issue for a very long time, but has been even more exacerbated this year, and more relevant, is systemic racism. And that is Black Lives Matter and all of the protests around the injustices caused by police brutality. COVID-19 health disparities. We're going to share with you some information about the disparities and who is being impacted by COVID-19, and especially around race and ethnicity. And then gentrification and displacement is the other issue that we're going to talk about. And this is directly related to the work that we've done with the Research for Equity and Power project. We're going to be learning and talking about how gentrification and displacement affects low-income communities and communities of color. So let's look in the chat. Katie, do you want to come back on for a sec and maybe read some of the responses?
Sure, we've had some great responses here in the chat, like develop strategies to partner with others, attend community meetings to better understand the needs of my community, strategize on how to collaborate with others, get better at identifying mutual interests and others' interests. So a lot of collaboration, which is really great to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do in the breakout groups. We want to know why you care about the issue. What's your self-interest? Who else do you think cares about this issue and why? What could you do to become more civically engaged in this issue? And how could you engage others to join your efforts? For example, how could different disciplines work together, right? We have a bunch of different disciplines on this Zoom call today. So, and then you're going to select one person from your group to report back to your key takeaways. So each of us is going to facilitate, each of our rep team members and our facilitators today will be facilitating each of these breakout groups. We'll have about 15 minutes and then we'll come back together afterwards. So Dr. G is going to be setting up our breakout rooms.
All right, they are all set up. And so I'm going to be sending you off to your rooms. All of the rooms are open. Go ahead and join those. Michael, do you want a room or are you good? And I'm muted. I was saying, I hope that you all had a great conversation and that we're going to give everybody a minute or so to get back into the main session.
It looks like we're all coming back here. Hi, everybody. So we had a great discussion. So I do have a couple people who are willing to share about the voter rights group. Claire and Katie.
Okay, so to get us started, and Katie, please jump in. So we started just with talking about some of the illegal practices and the misinformation, like the robocalls that we're going through, telling people that if they did mail-in voting, that their information would be used for other purposes. There were requests for money with some of the ballots that were sent in, and we moved from there really into talking about how difficult the process to register to vote is, and how it disenfranchises people. And I know, Katie, you can share, as you did with the group, of just how many hurdles there were to to get to the point where you're able to vote. I don't know if you want to talk about that now. Or...
Yeah,
Thank you.
basically it took both my husband and I multiple months to be able to register to vote, and that included being denied our registration to vote and also receiving ballots at our apartment that were for a person who does not live at our apartment. So there's just a lot of red tape surrounding voter registration.
And we talked about the main thing we can do is share information that's
Mhm.
correct with people, and to let people know about these ways that their vote is being tried, that people are trying to suppress their vote. So
Right, and we shared the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance and League of Women Voters sites, and talked about ways to stay on top of that information. And really, it's important to us to be sharing that out to people, just really to be proactively doing that. And we talked a bit about like why voting matters, and we really liked, somebody in our group shared that in Virginia in 2016 and in 2018, it sounds like, there was one race that was decided by one vote. And that one vote decided the race, but that race decided who was in control of the Virginia legislature. So it really underscores the power of the right to vote.
it really does. Thank you so much, everybody. So how about our Black Lives Matter group? Would you like to share our systemic racism group? Evie?
Yes. So we spoke about Black Lives Matter, systematic racism, and we identified like potential allies can be artists, churches, institutions, and we also someone made a really good point about how like one way to be civically engaged is to really make sure that you're informed and that you know what's happening, and that because Google is available for everyone, and like things like Katie discussed earlier, redlining play a big role in the big picture, and the resources are there that you could figure out and you could be informed so that you could be more civically engaged. Nikisha, what else is there anything you'd like to add?
We talked about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. We talked about the kind of allies that can be helpful, and we came up with, Evie said, artists, which are really great, and we've seen a lot of different artists in many different ways use their platform and their following to get the word out, and to show that they are in alliance with Black Lives Matter and against police brutality, against structural and systemic racism. I think what University of Pittsburgh is doing, even with this civic engagement week, with the CEC in Homewood, I think it's important that they have placed some of their financial resources in our community, and also some of their intellectual resources like Dr. Omer and Dr. G and all of these, brilliant students, graduate students. So that's important. And then also, I've noticed around Pittsburgh that there's a lot of churches that are showing an alliance with Black Lives Matter signs and some other things to show they're in support of the movement.
That is so awesome. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. There are many allies, and it was great that your group focused on that. And thank you for sharing, both Nikisha and Evie. How about our COVID-19 health disparity group?
All right, so we are going to actually toss the mic over to Kelsey P. And Kelsey, I'm going to also ask if Lisa and Sarah, if you can also join her and just kind of giving a summary of what we talked about.
Yeah, we briefly talked about the disproportionate effects that COVID-19 is having on the Black community and how we can make this information more known, because the information is very much not popularized, it's not available. And we talked about different allies that we could utilize to get this information out. We talked about using social media or different nonprofits or different maybe like health organizations in the communities to get this information out and help protect the community and the vulnerable. And then if Sarah and Lisa want to add anything.
I think another major thing that we talked about was how can we effectively get that information out and kind of through the heads of our own community on campus. And largely, in my own experience, like having people tell their personal stories can really help solidify that like we're still living in a pandemic, and to make it more real for people our own ages.
Yeah, I think both Kelsey and Sarah summarized our conversation really nicely. I think something that continues to surprise me when talking about COVID-19 disparities in communities is that there is data, like people are collecting it, but it's just not available for the group that needs it, for the groups that need it and can use it to help their communities get tested and provide opportunities to gain a greater understanding of what's actually happening.
Nice job, thank you.
That was great. Honestly, there's so many allies in this, but again, the idea of information getting in the right hands, and those allies are key to doing that. So thank you so much. And how about Donnell, your group on equitable development, gentrification, and displacement?
Sure. Yeah. So we talked about my experience with working with community organizations using existing plans. We talked about what we felt the most gentrified area is, and we had an interesting conversation. I'm going to toss this over to Kim. How are you doing, Kim?
Thank you. So yeah, we had a really good discussion, and just as kind of a caveat to all of this, I no longer live in the Pittsburgh area, so I had a little bit of a different perspective. But the group talked about East Liberty, and there was a really good book recommendation, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker by Damon Young. So I don't know if folks have read that, but I'm definitely going to check it out afterward. So that was one of the neighborhoods that our group felt was one of the most gentrified. And Lawrenceville was the other one that we all kind of agreed on. And I remember that back from my pit days. One of the things that we talked about as a possible prevention mechanism from gentrification is art. I shared that in Harrisburg, that's something that we are doing. We have kind of a midtown area that I think potentially took the wrong path, and now it's super expensive to live there. A lot of the businesses that were there 10 years ago are no longer there, which is really unfortunate. So I think, a lot of folks, to the points that were made earlier, were really listening to what the community needed and how can we keep people in their homes and build it up in a more positive way. And art has been a powerful tool with that. So I encourage folks to look into that. In terms of organizations with whom we could partner, we didn't actually get to that conversation. I don't know if similar organizations exist in Pittsburgh, but we have like a Harrisburg Young Professionals group, and we do community roundtables. I shared I'm in Junior League, and that's another big thing that we do. There's also a Leadership Harrisburg, and I think there's a corresponding Leadership Pittsburgh here that meets with various community partners as well as heads of businesses and whatnot to have these kinds of conversations. So that's what we talked about.
Well, that was awesome. So, I mean, all of you clearly care about these issues. That's what self-interest is about. And all of these issues matter to other people who you've identified. And all of you talked about ways to share that information and to engage others, right? So I think you all got an A today for Organizing 101. So I just want to thank you for coming. We have these resources for you in gratitude for coming today about organizing. They're in the slides. We have information about voter rights. That we talked about some of these groups in our session today in our breakout room, about systemic racism, about COVID-19 health disparities, some of the data on that from the CDC in our county, and some strategies about gentrification, housing development, and equitable development. That and even that game that Shanna talked about, the anti-displacement game, and you can get that game right on these slides. So, you know, thank you again for participating in Civic Action Week at Pitt. Here are our email addresses. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you to those people who support us, the Corporation the Corporation for National Community Service, and of course, the Pitt Community Engagement Centers. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day, and go out and organize.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.